You have to specifically look at the different indicators in your market that you're investing in. And don't be scared. You know, this might not be the best time for you to go out and maybe buy a buy and hold single family home because the numbers aren't working for you. You have to find deals where the numbers work, right? Don't sit here and try to fudge it because, oh, well, if interest rates go up a little bit more, you know, maybe if I put, you know, this much more down, don't fudge the numbers. Stick with what your convictions are. Whatever your key performance indicators were before, keep them the same.
Mike, thank you for joining me for our Thought Leader Spotlight series. I'm your host, Matt Camp, head of partnerships for DealMachine. And on these, we really like to shine a industry spotlight on experts like yourself, you know, how you educate our audience on how you see the world evolving. So today, really excited to have on Mike Cavaggioni. I know you're originally from Long Island, currently living in Hawaii. You served in the U.S. Navy for 20 years, so thank you for your service. Licensed realtor, financial coach, real estate investor yourself, and you have a podcast that is in the top 1% of podcasts internationally. So Average Joe Finances Podcast, go look that one up. And really excited to have you on today, Mike.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Really appreciate you bringing me on today.
Yeah, man. Can you maybe to start off, can you talk a little bit more about your real estate investing journey, how you got into real estate, the first deal you did? Would love to hear more about kind of, that journey, especially for our audience.
For sure. It depends on, the first deal, if it's my time where I became an accidental landlord or the time that I actually went out to make a purchase of my first investment property. But, the story is, when I first got involved in real estate, I always wanted to invest in real estate because when I was very young, my uncle used to always tell me like, hey, he was a state corrections officer and he was buying real estate constantly buying duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes in upstate New York. And he always told me, he's like, when I retire from the state, he's like, I just want my job to be wearing a tank top and driving around collecting checks on the, from the first through the fifth. And I said, man, that sounds pretty good. Right. So and that's exactly what he did. And, it's always been in the back of my mind for years and years and years. And I was in the Navy and I bought my first home when I was 22, when I was on recruiting duty. And that's when I became an accidental landlord because I wound up having to transfer and I couldn't sell it because I bought the house in 2007. You can guess why I couldn't sell it a couple years later.
Yeah.
So, fast forward a little bit past that, that went through and that was done and over with. I actually wound up short selling that home in 2012 because it just never bounced back. And I couldn't rent it out for anywhere near what I was even paying for the mortgage. So that was a painful process, but it kind of left a sour taste in my mouth for real estate. So I kind of backed off for a while. Mm-hmm. Fast forward to when I was coming out to Hawaii, my wife and I were like, hey, when we move out there, we want to be able to buy a house. And we knew kind of ahead of time that we were coming here. So about a year before, actually almost 2 years before, we started our plan to get completely out of debt and have money saved up for any type of expenses that we might need to purchase a home out here. Because, obviously being in the military, we got the VA loan. So I was like, oh, we could do 0% down. Well, I didn't know at the time there was a cap too. So I had to pay the difference in the cap. So I'm glad we saved up some money. So anyway, we come up with this plan to completely pay off our debt. Obviously, we started with, the easy stuff. We did the Dave Ramsey baby steps to start, right? Steps 1 through 3, and we snowballed our debt to get completely out of debt. And then we saved up about $40K in our savings account before we actually got to Hawaii, which thank goodness, because I wound up having to put a small down payment because the cap at the time was $721,050. So anything over that, you have to put 1/4 down, right? So thankfully we were prepared for that. And then the rest of the money went into renovations to do the things that we wanted to do to the home. Now, being able to get to this point though, that was the biggest part. And, of course we did the baby steps, but we also did, the envelope method. We were combining a whole bunch of different things just to make sure that we were staying disciplined and staying on track. Because probably for me, the hardest thing was not, it was overcoming my spending habit, right? So I'm not the spender I'm not the saver in the family. My wife is, right? I'm the spender. So, I had to rethink how I was spending my money. So that's when I started paying these different envelopes and, working on, okay, this is what I'm going to pay myself for. and this is what we're going to pay all the bills with, and then the rest goes into savings, right? So we come up with this plan, and it worked out great. Then we get out to Hawaii, and a friend of mine put the bug in my ear again. He said, "Hey, man," he's like, "you need to start investing in real estate." And he was telling me about the stuff he was doing, and it just started bringing back all these old feelings from the conversations I was having with my uncle. And I said, "Yeah, I do." So I went out to a meetup, and well, actually, first I had lunch with him and his wife, and we got my wife on board, right? We had to make sure all of us were on the same page. And at the time, he was actually helping me analyze my first deal. It was a duplex back in Chesapeake, Virginia. Now, buying my first rental property from 5,000 miles away was an experience in itself. But at the same time, I bought a rental property 5,000 miles away. With that comes a lot of challenges, right? So we buy this duplex and we close on it in February of 2020. So what happens after that? The world ends, right? So it's like every time I'm like, yeah, I want to get into this and I want to start, just something crazy happens, and it's like almost trying to push me away. And I was determined. I was like, no, this isn't going to happen this time. So we pushed through, we persevered. I had, one of my tenants couldn't pay their rent, so we worked things out. And I actually got him set up with this rent repayment program that actually paid all the back due rent that he owed, plus the late fees. So we wound up cash flowing on that property. It was almost $900 a month, which was pretty nice.
Yeah.
And I wound up selling it a year later because I couldn't fly back to do anything that I wanted to do. Like, we had this military travel ban because of COVID and everything, so we couldn't fly back. So we wound up selling it a year later. I'm like, okay, we got to do something else. I want to do something that's going to be a little bit more passive because of how busy I am with everything else. So we started looking at real estate syndications as a limited partner, and got into that and went to a bunch of meetups there, and got myself educated. I think that's one of the most important things. And I know I'm kind of going on, but we're getting to it, right?
This is great.
But got myself educated on real estate syndications, and met some great groups of general partners. And there's two different groups that I invest with right now, and just wrapped up our second deal, and the third one is supposed to be closing the first week of June.
Love it, man.
So
Good
yeah,
work.
that's kind of the journey up until now.
Yep. Yeah. And I think, you have so many different, like you said, so many different learning experiences between the military and the 2008 and then, more recently. So I would love to dig into that a little bit too.
Sure.
I know with your Navy background, is there anything from being involved there, going through training, going through, that whole experience that you think has really contributed to your success when it comes to the finance world and real estate and then whatnot?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's part of that mentality that we get in the military to push through and persevere, not let certain things hold you down. And that's why, when I had that whole bad experience with that first property, it did take a lot out of me for a little bit, but I was able to get over that and keep moving on because I remembered, this is not who I am. Who I am is somebody who pushes through and finishes what I started. So I definitely think that's helped me, that military mentality for sure.
Yeah. What about, going through 2008, is there anything that buying the property right before that and going through that whole experience and, having to sell or short sale in 2012, like what all do you take from that you advise newbies or people just getting into it today should be learning from it?
Yeah, Matt, appreciate that. And I would say the biggest thing to take away from that is I survived, and, survive and then thrive. That's the way I'm looking at it, right? Because sure, I just made it out of there. But I look at where I was then and I look at where I'm at now. And if I wouldn't have gotten back into real estate, I wouldn't be where I'm at now. Like, I'm at the point where I'm retiring from the Navy this year. So between that, my investments, and my other business that I have, I'm going to be financially independent at the age of 38. So I think I'm in a pretty good spot. And, and part of that was pushing through and not letting what happened in 2008, 2009, and then short selling my home in 2012, not letting that be something that holds me back. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people, because with where we're at today, I think this is in a lot of people's heads right now is like, hey, where are we going right now? Are we going to see a repeat of 2008? Are we going to see something like that happen again? And, even if we do, you have to realize that if you push through, you're going to make it out on top as long as you stay consistent with what you're trying to do, with what your goals are. So, I would say just persevere for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask, I know you often, I mean, on your podcast talk about finances, and mentioned you were just on another podcast recently talking about the market and whatnot. It's, seems to be a pretty uncertain time right now for everybody. So what is your approach to real estate right now, or investing in general?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Matt. The way I look at it is the real estate market is several micro markets all put together, right? It's not just like this. It's not like, the S&P 500 where you see it like drop and like everything's crashing and oh my God, the world's ending, right? In real estate, yeah, I mean, we saw that in 2008 because every single one of those micro markets were affected by, the lending practices that were happening back then. We're not seeing a lot of the same trends of 2008, but what we are seeing is, a buyer, I guess not buyer saturated, but buyers are getting tired, right, of where the market's at right now with the high prices. And now with inflation going up, yeah, I'm sorry, not inflation, but with the interest rates going up, and of course inflation as well, but interest rates rising is making it, more difficult, or the home affordability is, that gap is getting a lot smaller, right? So you're seeing a lot of people not being able to afford the homes that they could have afforded 2 months ago. And the inventory is still super low. So when you look at all of the stuff that's going on, you have to look at specific areas, specific markets, right? And target your specific market and figure out what's going to happen there. You can't look at this broad picture and say, oh, all real estate's going to crash or all real estate's going to correct or something like that, right? The way I'm looking at it is, especially like out here in Hawaii where I'm at, I think we're actually reaching a plateau, right? And when I say plateau, I'm saying like we are plateauing and it's just going flat across, right? I think we're starting to stabilize. I don't see us dropping. I mean, right now we're still averaging, I think, over 100% for home sales out here, like for the price, over 100%. And, with that, it's the payments over asking price are coming down, but people are still paying over asking price. So we'll see like where it goes. I mean, like I said, I think it's starting to stabilize. We're going to start to see the average median household price kind of just flatline a bit, which actually the past 2 months, it's been the same. It's stopped going up. So I think I'm in a pretty good spot with where I think we're going. But again, that's just my opinion. And it also depends on the specific market. Like what's happening out here in Honolulu is not going to be the same thing that happens in Colorado Springs,
Right.
or Dallas, Texas. So you have to specifically look at the different indicators in your market that you're investing in, and don't be scared. This might not be the best time for you to go out and maybe buy a buy and hold single family home because the numbers aren't working for you. You have to find deals where the numbers work, right? Don't sit here and try to fudge it because, oh, well, if interest rates go up a little bit more, maybe if I put, this much more down, don't fudge the numbers. Stick with what your convictions are. Whatever your key performance indicators were before, keep them the same. Don't change, what you do right now currently, especially if you're newer and you're just getting started and you just learned how to figure out and how to, put a deal together. Don't change what it is that you've learned and what you want to do, right? Take everything into account. Take the interest rates, take the area, take what's happening in the are, growth, if, are there jobs that are coming to the area. Take all of that into account before you make a decision, because even if there's a correction, if you buy an asset that is cash flowing, you're in a pretty safe spot. But if you're buying something and you're banking on the appreciation, this might not be the best time for that. Because like I said, I think we're stabilizing. I don't see a huge crash. Maybe there'll be some dips, but I don't see like this huge like correction coming.
Yeah, and I definitely agree that the in the end, real estate's a local game for sure. So it's like, hey, paying attention to your local market and how how your neighborhood's doing, how your particular city's doing is going to be the most key metric to focus on. Not everything moves the same way nationally. So Yeah, one thing I know you mentioned was being financially free at the age of 38. You said, right? Is the
Yeah.
track you're on? That's awesome, man. So I know a big part of that, and a big part of what you talk about on the podcast and within your site and things is budgeting and being able to achieve financial freedom through smart spending. Do you have any advice there for people that are trying to kind of build that initial or at least set initial goals around financial freedom and any tips or tricks in the budgeting world that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, Matt, absolutely. So, that B word, budget, a lot of people get scared when they hear that, right? So, if you don't like that word, that's fine. Call it a spending plan, right? Don't call it a budget. But, the biggest part about having a budget or spending plan is knowing where your money's going, knowing, what it's actually doing. Because if you don't, that's when it escapes you, and you reach the end of the month and you're waiting for that next paycheck and you're like, hey, I don't know if I could buy groceries this week because I'm broke, right? So if you're just starting out and you're in a spot where you're paying off a lot of debt, the biggest thing I would say is to create a debt snowball, right? You go after your highest interest rate and start paying that stuff off. And then, and keep making your minimum payments, everything else. And as you keep doing that, raise the amount that you're putting into each next level, right? So whatever you were dumping into that first piece of debt, you're going to take all that money and dump it into the next piece, and just it adds up and it snowballs and snowballs and snowballs, right? And eventually you get to pay off all your debt and you get to celebrate each win as you get there. But the biggest thing is getting rid of that consumer debt, right? Because I'll tell you, I'm a little bit different than other people when they talk about this, right? Because I don't believe all debt is bad, or I don't believe even sometimes some consumer debt could be good depending on what you're using it for. When I bought that duplex, I took out some money on my credit card. I did a cash advance because my lender came back and said, "Hey, we actually need an extra 10% down." I'm like, "Well, I can't just make that happen." And I did. I had to make it happen. So I found an alternative way and I did a cash advance. Um, Not the best thing for me to do, but I was still at a point where I had a property that was cash flowing $900 a month, even with that. So I was in a pretty good spot to do that. So
Mhm.
you have to look at the entire situation. Same thing as like I was talking about with the market, right? Look at your entire situation. But for a majority of Americans, what they're going through right now is that, they have this high interest debt that they're paying off. And for them, following these methods to snowball your debt is one of the best ways to get rid of credit card debt. And not and again, like me personally, I use my credit cards like crazy to get my points, and I just pay them off right away, right?
Mhm.
So I pay all my bills on my American Express, right? I rack up my points and then I pay it off. So you have to have a plan, but in order to get there, you have to get debt free first. uh, you know have emergency savings, right? Have 3 to 6 months. Some people even say 6 to 12 months now. And in today's economy and uncertainty, maybe 6 to 12 is the better answer. But I still tell people, if you can get yourself to 3 to 6, getting to 6 to 12 is rather easy at that point, because you've already gotten yourself to the point where you know how to save, right? And then after you get there, you start investing, start putting your money into assets that are going to pay you, that are going to make you more money, right? You have to employ those dollars. You have to have a relationship with your money. You can't just sit here and treat it like it's just currency, even though it is currency, right? You need to have that personal relationship with money and how you treat it. So get yourself to that point where you pay off the debt, you start investing, you've got your money saved up, your emergency funds in case something was to happen, right? And now you're investing and you're employing your dollars into something that's going to pay you back, and and then some. And for most people, if you're not comfortable, with going right into real estate or anything like that, index funds are a pretty safe way to get started. It's one of the first things I started investing in myself was index funds and REITs, which is still technically real estate, right? But I liked the way that they were set up. And, that's just a good, safe way to get started, to start just building up your portfolio. Or you can take that money and save up for a down payment on a rental property. So it just depends on which route you want to go. I prefer real estate, but other people prefer staying somewhere safe in index funds, and that's okay. As long as you're doing something to break out of that cycle, then you're going to be in a much better place. But if you want to get there a little bit quicker, real estate's probably the best way to go, at least in my personal opinion.
I'm with you. On the real estate side, I know you alluded to it a little bit about getting your wife on board. Do you have any tips or advice there of like, hey, how to have that conversation with your spouse, how to start, getting everybody on the same page within the family?
Oh, Matt, that's a tough question.
Put you on the spot there.
But a good one. But a good one. Because at first she was not on board at all, and I'm sitting here trying to explain this stuff to her. And I think one of the pitfalls that I found myself in was thinking that she knew what I had already known from what I've learned, right? From going to these meetups, from, going to these Zoom classes and learning from other investors. I had all this stuff in the back of my head. So when I'm sitting here trying to explain this, I'm like, this makes sense, right? Doesn't this make sense? And she's like, what are you talking about? This is like another language. So you have to break down that barrier, right? And I think the best way to do that was when we went out and we had lunch with our friends, and we had, mutual connections that were also investors sit down and say, okay, look, here's what we're doing, right? And this is why it makes sense. And then here's, the deal that Mike found, and here's what makes sense about it. And they were able to explain it to her a little bit better than I was, because for me, I was still in learning mode and still processing all the data that I couldn't regurgitate it to a point where it was like understandable. It was just kind of like, blah, 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 right?
Uh-huh.
And, and she just wasn't understanding it when I was trying to explain it. So after that experience, everything started to pick up, and she's like, okay, cool. You know what? I'm on board. She's like, now that I understand what you're doing, I trust your decisions with this. And even with the syndications now as a limited partner, like I'll sit here and try to explain the numbers to her, and I'll go over everything and explain what the return on investment is going to be. And she's just like, hey, you know what? We're good, because you've already proven to me that, you've got this. So I think it's more of a comfort level than it is an education level, right? So there's a little bit of education in there. Got to make sure that your spouse is comfortable, and with the education. But the other thing that they have to be comfortable with is your drive, your motivation, and what you're doing. That you're not just going to go and take all your money and dump it into some type of risky asset, and all of a sudden things flop, and you guys are floundering trying to figure out what just happened. We just paid off all of our debt, and now we're back in debt again, and not in a good spot because of, the decision you made with an investment. So that comfort level has to be there, and it has to be genuine. So sit down with your partner, have that conversation, show them numbers, have them take some of the same classes with you, get them educated. And if they're really not interested in it, that's fine, right? But make sure that they're at a point of comfort where they're okay with you making those kinds of decisions. Now, I won't make those big money decisions without her consent, right? I'll tell her, hey, I need to move, $50,000 here to do this, so we can invest in this asset, and here's what it's going to do for us. And I explain it, like a 5-year-old, right? Or like, what is it? Talking to a 5th grader. And if you put it like that, it just makes it easier and things just flow better. And again, it's all about the comfort level.
Yeah, and any relationship is built on trust like that. So talking to a significant other, like you said, there's education is a part of that, but it's really getting to that point where you can really trust each other like that. So I know we're running up on time here. This has been fantastic. So Mike, I really appreciate you jumping on here too. One last question I had, just because I know we have people on here who would fall into this bucket too, but you mentioned investing in, virtually in a property, far away. Do you have any tips on that process, advice there of how to invest out of state, how to go through that process especially as a newer investor?
Absolutely. When you hear all those people talk about building your team first before you start going out there and doing things, listen to them. I didn't. Okay. I thought I had a good team put together, but I wasn't quite there yet. Right. So I was eventually able to have that team put together, but I thought, my team was just my property manager and my realtor. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm set. Well, no, I didn't have contractors. I didn't have anything else set up out there, and when things broke and things went crazy, and I'm getting phone calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, and, toilet's not working. and I had nobody to call. So yeah, those are things that you definitely want to get on board with especially when people say that, have your team built first. That's probably the most important thing, because once you have a solid team, you can go in there with a lot more confidence. The other thing too is just make sure that you can manage that property from far away. And if you can't, hire a property manager. And again, that will go into your numbers when you're putting together if this deal will work or not. So make sure you have that money to the side to pay a property manager if that's the route you're going to go with long distance investing.
Yeah. What's kind of the bare bones team look like? Like who are the absolute key players that you need to have on that team?
Yeah. So if you're, you need to have a realtor out there, right? Because you need to have somebody that's going to be out there to help you process everything, or a real estate lawyer, right? Okay. You need to have your property manager if you're not going to manage it yourself, which I definitely recommend. If you're going to be like 5,000 miles away, like I was, have a property manager. You need to have contractors on your team, right? You need to have people that are going to be able to make any repairs. You need to have somebody that's on call when something breaks that you can call and make that happen, especially when you're pretty far away. Now that's for having the property side. Now, if you're looking to really step it up and start investing heavily back in whatever market you're at you need to have a whole bunch of other members on your team, right? You need to have people that are making cold calls if you're not doing it yourself, right? You need to have people that are out there driving for dollars and finding you properties. I'm pretty sure that name behind you that's lit up there is a great way to help with that.
Heard of that.
Right. So, you need to have people out there. This is not a one person sport, right? This is a team sport, and you can do certain things by yourself, but eventually you're going to need help. You don't want to be the person that's stuck in the water, reaching out for a hand, and there's no one there to pull you out when you're too tired to keep swimming. So, definitely build that team for sure.
Awesome. That was a great place to end. Appreciate it, Mike.
No worries.
Where's the best place for people to get in touch with you? I know you have a new website. You've got your podcast. Can you kind of share out the resources for people to our audience to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So just made a new website that kind of puts everything together in one place. So it's MikeCavaggioni.com. It's my name, MikeCavaggioni.com. It's kind of hard to spell my name, so I'll spell it out. It's CAVAGGIONI. But yeah, definitely hit me up. All my links are there. My contact info. You can email me. Definitely open to have a chat anytime.
Awesome. And then the Average Joe Finances podcast as well. I know that's again, top 1% podcast out there. So love what you're doing there. Really appreciate your time coming on here and really enjoyed the conversation, Mike.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate it, Matt. Thanks for having me on, and aloha.
Awesome. To everyone watching, this is Matt Camp with DealMachine, and happy deal finding.